What happens when the system designed to protect you becomes your worst nightmare. For 17-year-old Jamal Vance, a routine traffic stop on a sun-drenched Georgia highway quickly descended into a brutal assault by the very officers sworn to uphold the law. Bruised, beaten, and thrown in a cell, they thought they had broken him. They mocked him, taunted him, and told him he was just another statistic. But they made one critical mistake. They gave him one phone call. And with that single call to a man they could never have imagined, Jamal didn't just call for help. He called down a storm that would tear their corrupt world apart, piece by painful piece. This isn't just a story of injustice. It's the story of what happens when the powerless find their power and karma comes calling, with the full force of the United States government behind it. The Georgia sun was a relentless, hazy weight on the black asphalt of Route 78. Inside his father's 10-year-old Lexus, the air conditioning was a whisper of cool relief. Jamal Vance, 17, and sharp as a tack in a freshly pressed button-down shirt, gripped the leather-wrapped steering wheel. His knuckles were a little white. This was it. The final interview for the Harrison Scholarship at Emory University. A full ride. The kind of opportunity that could change the trajectory of a life. His father's car, a symbol of quiet, hard-earned success, hummed along smoothly. It was old, but Robert Vance believed in maintaining things. "Take care of your tools, Jamal, and they'll take care of you," he'd always said. Jamal was making good time. He'd left with an hour to spare, just like his dad taught him. He passed the sign, "Welcome to Oak Creek," a friendly place to call home. The town looked like a postcard from a forgotten era, historic storefronts, a manicured town square with a requisite Confederate soldier statue, and American flags drooping from every lamppost in the humid air. It felt thick. The friendliness seemed painted on thin as a coat of varnish over rotting wood. That's when he saw it, the flash of red and blue in his rearview mirror. His heart didn't just sink, it plummeted. He immediately checked his speed. 64 in a 65 zone. He signaled, pulling the Lexus onto the gravel shoulder, the tires crunching to a slow stop. He turned the engine off, placed his hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, and took a slow, deep breath. He'd had the talk with his father more times than he could count, not about the birds and the bees, but about this exact moment. Keep your hands visible. No sudden movements. Yes, sir. No, sir. Announce everything you're about to do. Don't give them an excuse, son. Not a single one. A large, imposing figure filled his driver's side mirror. The officer, a man whose gut strained the buttons of his tan uniform, had a face like cured leather. His name tag read Miller. He tapped the window with a thick knuckle. Jamal slowly, deliberately lowered the window. The humid air instantly flooded the car. License and Registration Officer Miller grunted his eyes, hidden behind reflective aviator sunglasses. He wasn't looking at Jamal. He was scanning the car's interior, the plush leather seats, the polished wood trim. His lip curled into a subtle sneer. "Yes, sir," Jamal said, his voice steady, despite the tremor in his chest. "My license is in my wallet, in my back right pocket. My registration is in the glove compartment. May I reach for them, sir?" Miller just stared. A second officer, younger, leaner, with the name Davies on his uniform, came to the passenger side, peering in. "Go ahead," Miller said, boredom dripping from his voice. Slowly, Jamal moved with the practiced deliberation of a bomb disposal expert. He retrieved his wallet, handed over his license. He then leaned over, opened the glove compartment, and produced the registration and proof of insurance. Miller took the documents, his eyes flicking from the paper to Jamal's face. "Robert Vance," he read aloud, then looked at Jamal. "This your daddy's car?" "Yes, sir. He's letting me borrow it for a university interview in Atlanta." Miller grunted again, a sound of dismissive disbelief. He walked back to his patrol car. Davies stayed put, his hand resting on the butt of his holstered Glock, his eyes fixed on Jamal. The silence stretched thick and suffocating. Jamal could hear his own heartbeat, a frantic drum against his ribs. 10 minutes felt like an hour. He could see his chances at the scholarship, his meticulously planned future, dissolving like sugar in the oppressive Georgia heat. Finally, Miller returned. He tossed Jamal's license and registration onto the passenger seat. "Step out of the vehicle, son." The polite facade was gone. The word son was an insult, a verbal pat on the head to a child or an inferior. "Sir, is there a problem?" Jamal asked, keeping his voice level. "I'll be the one asking the questions," Miller snapped. "Step out of the car, now." Jamal complied, his mind racing. What did I do? A tail light out. Did I drift over the line? He got out his dress shoes, sinking slightly into the soft gravel. The heat was like a physical blow. "Put your hands on the roof of the car," Miller commanded. Jamal did as he was told, the metal of the Lexus hot against his palms. He felt Miller's hands pat him down, rough and invasive. "What's a boy like you doing with a fancy car like this?" Miller's voice was low, right by his ear. "You in the pharmaceutical business, moving a little product up to the big city?" "Sir, I'm a student. That's my father's car. I'm going to a scholarship interview at Emory University." "Uh-huh," Emory Miller scoffed. "Davies, have a look inside. Let's see what this student is studying." Jamal's blood ran cold. He watched as the younger officer opened the driver's side door and began to rifle through the car. He saw his meticulously organized folder of transcripts and recommendation letters tossed onto the seat. He saw Davies rooting under the seats in the center console. "What are you looking for?" Sir Jamal asked, a note of desperation creeping into his voice. Miller shoved him against the car. "I told you to shut your mouth. You don't ask us questions. Find anything," Davies Miller called out. Davies was now on the passenger side. He paused, then looked over at Miller with a strange expression. "Well, well, well." "What do we have here?" he said, his voice theatrically loud. He pulled his hand out from between the passenger seat and the center console. In his gloved hand was a small plastic baggie. Inside was a white, crystalline substance. Jamal's world tilted on its axis. "That's not mine," he said, his voice a choked whisper. The words felt useless, pathetic, even as he said them. "Oh, it's not yours," Miller chuckled, a low, ugly sound. "That's what they all say. Looks like your little scholarship interview is cancelled, boy." He grabbed Jamal's arm, twisted it violently behind his back, and slammed his face against the hot roof of the Lexus. Pain, sharp and blinding, exploded behind his eyes. "You have the right to remain silent," Miller snarled, the metallic click of handcuffs, echoing in the sudden, terrifying silence of the Georgia roadside. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As he was shoved into the scorching hot back of the patrol car, the cage separating him from the officers, a stark symbol of his new reality. Jamal looked back at his father's car. The door was still ajar. His interview folder was scattered on the floor. His future, so bright just minutes ago, had been extinguished. He wasn't a scholar anymore. He was a suspect. In Oak Creek, he was something much worse. The Oak Creek Police Department smelled of stale coffee, industrial cleaner, and a faint underlying odor of despair. It was less a station and more a concrete bunker with small barred windows that let in slivers of light, but no hope. Jamal was dragged from the patrol car, his arms aching from the tight cuffs, a fresh bruise swelling on his cheek where his face had met the car roof. Officer Miller shoved him toward the booking desk, where a portly, bored-looking sergeant sat behind a thick pane of plexiglass. "Got another one," Frank Miller announced with grim satisfaction. "Found him on Route 78. Possession with intent to distribute." Kid was lippy too. The sergeant Frank barely looked up. He slid a form through a slot. "You know the drill, Miller." The process was a blur of humiliation. His fingerprints were taken, his dress shirt and slacks replaced with a faded orange jumpsuit that felt rough as sandpaper against his skin. His leather shoes were swapped for flimsy plastic slides. His wallet, his watch, his phone, his connections to the real world were dropped into a Ziploc bag. Each step was designed to strip him of his identity, to reduce him from Jamal Vance honor student to inmate 734. He was led down a short, grim hallway to a holding cell. The heavy steel door clanged shut behind him with a sound of absolute finality. The cell was a 6-by-8-foot box of concrete and steel. A thin, stained mattress lay on a metal slab, and a combination toilet sink unit was bolted to the far wall. The air was thick with the ghosts of misery past. The adrenaline that had sustained him began to fade, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. The interview. It was supposed to be starting right now. He imagined the panel of professors looking at the empty chair where he was supposed to be a mark of no show being placed next to his name. The years of hard work, the late nights, studying the debate club victories, all of it incinerated on a roadside by a man with a badge and a baggie. That baggie. He replayed the moment in his head 1,000 times. Davies's theatrical pause, the way he pulled it from a spot Jamal couldn't see. It was impossible. His father was meticulous. The car was cleaned and detailed every month. There was nothing in that car. It was planted. He knew it with a certainty that was as solid as the concrete walls around him. But who would believe him? A black kid in an expensive car found with drugs in a town like Oak Creek. The story wrote itself. He was a cliché, a statistic in the making. An hour later, the door squealed open. It was Miller and Davies. Miller was smirking. Davies looked uncomfortable, refusing to meet Jamal's eyes. "Your chariot awaits," Professor Miller sneered. "Time for your official statement. Try to get your story straight this time." They led him to a small windowless interrogation room. A single metal table and 3 chairs were bolted to the floor. A camera was mounted high in one corner. Jamal sat down, his heart hammering. He remembered his father's words from a different kind of talk. "If you are ever in custody, you say 5 words and 5 words only. I want to speak to my lawyer. Don't say anything else, not a word." Miller sat opposite him, leaning forward, his bulk taking up all the space in the room. Davies stood by the door, a silent, nervous statue. "All right, Jamal," Miller began, his voice taking on a deceptively calm tone. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way. We know you're a mule. We know you were taking this product up to your buddies in Atlanta. You tell us who your supplier is. Maybe we can talk to the DA. Get you a lighter sentence. Juvenile detention isn't so bad. You'll be out in a couple of years." Jamal took a breath. "I want to speak to my lawyer." The smirk vanished from Miller's face. "You want a lawyer? Kid, you're in a world of trouble. A lawyer can't help you now. We've got you dead to rights. The drugs were in your car." "I want to speak to my lawyer, Jamal," repeated his voice, stronger this time. He focused on a crack in the concrete wall behind Miller's head, refusing to let the officer see his fear. Miller's face flushed a deep, angry red. "You think you're smart, don't you? You think you can come into my town in your fancy car and play games?" He stood up, knocking his chair back. He paced behind Jamal. "You're in Oak Creek now, boy. Your big city rules don't apply here. We are the law here." He suddenly stopped and leaned down his face, inches from Jamal's. His breath was sour with stale coffee. Maybe you just need a little persuasion to help you remember. He looked at Davies. Step outside for a minute. The kid and I need to have a private chat. Davies hesitated, his eyes wide. Sergeant Miller, I don't think Sheriff Brody would. Did I ask what the sheriff would think? Miller snarled. Get out, Davies scurried out of the room, the door clicking shut behind him. The sound of the lock sliding into place was like a death knell. The camera in the corner had a small, blinking red light. It was on. Miller saw Jamal glance at it. He let out a harsh laugh. Oh, don't you worry about that, he said, walking over to the camera. He took out a wad of chewing gum, chewed it for a second, and then casually stuck it over the lens, obscuring the view. Technical difficulties? He turned back to Jamal, a predator's grin spreading across his face. Now, where were we? Ah, yes. You were about to tell me everything. He grabbed the front of Jamal's jumpsuit, hauling him out of the chair and slamming him against the wall. The impact knocked the wind out of him. Who do you work for? Miller roared his fist, connecting with Jamal's stomach. Pain exploded through his midsection, acid and fire. Jamal gasped, folding over. I don't... He wheezed. Another blow, this time to his ribs. A sickening crack echoed in the small room. Jamal cried out a raw, involuntary sound of agony. This is obstruction of justice. Son Miller grunted, punctuating each word with a shove. You're making this so much worse for yourself. He threw Jamal to the floor. Jamal curled into a ball, his arms trying to protect his head and torso. Kicks rained down on his back, his legs his side. The flimsy plastic slides offered no protection. Each impact was a jolt of pure agony. He could feel his ribs screaming, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. Through the haze of pain, he heard Miller breathing heavily like an overworked animal. Last chance, Miller panted, standing over him. Talk, or we're going to find more product in that car. Enough to put you away until you're a grey-haired old man. Jamal tasted blood in his mouth. He was shaking, every nerve ending on fire. He knew that if he stayed silent, the beating would continue. But he also knew, with a primal certainty, that giving them what they wanted was a trap. Any confession, any name he invented, would be a nail in his own coffin. He had one card left to play. One lifeline. His father. He pushed himself up, leaning against the wall, his body a symphony of pain. He looked at Miller, his vision blurry. I have nothing to say. He gasped, his voice raspy. I want my phone call. Miller stared at him, his chest heaving. For a moment, Jamal thought he was going to start again. But then a cruel smile returned to Miller's face. Fine, he sneered, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. You get one call. Call your mama. Tell her you're not coming home for a long, long time. He unlocked the door and dragged Jamal, bruised and broken back, to the holding cell, leaving him on the concrete floor like a pile of discarded trash. The world swam in and out of focus. Jamal lay on the cold floor of the cell, each breath a new discovery of pain. His side felt like it was on fire. A sharp stabbing sensation told him at least one rib was broken. His face was swelling, his lips split. He was a canvas of fresh bruises. But through the physical agony, his mind was working, clinging to the one sliver of hope they had foolishly given him. One call. A half-hour later, a different deputy, one he hadn't seen before, unlocked his cell door. Sheriff wants to see you. Jamal used the wall to pull himself to his feet, a low groan escaping his lips. The deputy led him not to an interrogation room, but to a cluttered office. A large man with a florid face and thinning grey hair sat behind a large oak desk. A brass nameplate read, Sheriff John Brody. He had the look of a man who enjoyed his authority, his lunch, and the misery of others in equal measure. Miller and Davies stood against the wall like twin gargoyles. Sheriff Brody looked Jamal up and down, a smug, contemptuous expression on his face. "Son, my officers tell me you've been uncooperative. That's a real shame. We found 2 ounces of methamphetamine in your vehicle. In my county, that's trafficking. We're talking a minimum of 10 years in a state penitentiary. Now, I'm a reasonable man. You give us your supplier, we can make this go away. Maybe knock it down to simple possession time served. You'll be on your way." It was a lie. A blatant, transparent lie. 2 ounces. They were escalating it, building a case so airtight he would have no choice but to plead. Jamal's resolve hardened. He wouldn't play their game. Officer Miller said, "I get 1 phone call." Jamal said, his voice hoarse. Brody chuckled, leaning back in his creaking chair. "He did. Didn't he? Fine. Give the boy his call. Let him cry to his girlfriend or his mama. Won't make a difference." He gestured to a dusty landline phone on the corner of his desk. 1 call. 5 minutes. Local or collect only. Miller shoved a chair toward the desk. Jamal limped over and sat down, his whole body screaming in protest. His mind was clear. He knew he couldn't call a lawyer in Atlanta. They'd never accept a collect call from a jail. He had to call the one number he knew would connect. The one number he knew by heart, had memorized since he was a child for emergencies. His father's direct line at the Department of Justice. He picked up the receiver. His hands were shaking not from fear anymore, but from a surge of righteous fury. He dialed the operator. "I need to make a collect call to Washington, D.C., he said, his voice steady. Brody raised an eyebrow. Miller and Davies exchanged a look of amusement. "Big shot calling Nassau to D.C. The operator connected him. A calm, professional voice answered on the other end. "Office of the Attorney General. How may I direct your call?" Jamal felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled him. "I have a collect call from Jamal Vance. Will you accept the charges?" There was a brief, professional pause. "1 moment, please." In the office, Sheriff Brody was starting to look impatient. "What is this, some kind of joke?" The line clicked. A new voice came, on a voice that was the foundation of Jamal's entire world. A voice of calm authority, of measured intellect, of unwavering strength. "This is Robert Vance." The professional tone was there, but underneath, Jamal could hear the slightest tremor, the sound of a father who sees a call from his son coming from a jail and instantly knows something is terribly wrong. "Dad." Jamal's voice broke the emotion he'd been suppressing, finally cracking through. "Dad, it's me. It's Jamal." Sheriff Brody, Miller and Davies froze. Their smirks faltered. They were listening intently now, their amusement replaced by a flicker of confusion. "Jamal's son, where are you? What's happened?" The concern in Robert Vance's voice was sharp, cutting through the static. I'm in a town called Oak Creek, Georgia. I'm at the police station. Dad, they pulled me over. They said they found drugs in the car. They beat me up, Dad. My rib, I think it's broken. They're trying to frame me." The words tumbled out a torrent of pain and fear. On the other end of the line, there was a deathly silence. Not a silence of shock, but the silence of a powerful engine engaging. The silence of a predator that has just spotted its prey. When Robert Vance spoke again, his voice had changed. The warmth was gone, replaced by a glacial cold. It was a voice that had cross-examined mob bosses and dismantled terrorist cells. It was a voice that did not ask, but commanded. "Son, listen to me very carefully. Do not say another word to them. Do you understand? Not one more word. Hand the phone to the ranking officer in the room." Jamal looked at Sheriff Brody, whose face was now a mask of dawning horror. Miller and Davies looked like they had seen a ghost. "He wants to speak to you," Jamal said, holding the phone out to the sheriff. Brody wiped a sweaty palm on his trousers and took the receiver as if it were a venomous snake. "This is Sheriff Brody of the Oak Creek Police Department," he said, trying to sound authoritative, but his voice was thin. The voice on the other end of the phone was quiet, but it filled the room with an unimaginable weight. Every word was a perfectly shaped shard of ice. "Sheriff Brody, my name is Robert Vance. I am the Attorney General of the United States. You are currently holding my 17-year-old son, Jamal Vance, in your custody. You have one opportunity, and one opportunity only, to explain to me under what authority you have physically assaulted a minor and are holding him without access to legal counsel." The color drained from Brody's face. He looked like he'd been punched in the gut. His eyes darted wildly around the room, from Miller to Davies, who were both now sheet white. The name Robert Vance had landed in the room like a bomb. Not just a lawyer, not some D.C. politician. The Attorney General, the head of the Department of Justice, their boss's boss's boss. Mr. Attorney General, sir." Brody stammered, his folksy sheriff persona shattering into a million pieces. "There seems to be a misunderstanding. Your son was pulled over on a routine traffic stop. My officers discovered a significant quantity of narcotics in his vehicle." The voice on the other end cut him off sharp as a guillotine. "Sheriff, cease your prevaricating. I have your son's location triangulated. I know exactly where you are. I am looking at your department's record of civil rights complaints as we speak. It is extensive." A beat of silence. "Here is what is going to happen. You are going to transport my son under guard to the nearest hospital for a full medical evaluation of his injuries. You are not to question him further. You are not to touch him. You are to preserve all evidence related to this traffic stop. That includes all dash-cam footage, all body-cam footage, all intake forms, and every square inch of that vehicle which is now federal evidence. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir," Brody whispered, his hand shaking so violently the phone rattled against his ear. "After he has been medically cleared, you will release him on his own recognizance. And then, Sheriff, you will wait. A team from the DOJ's Civil Rights Division is being dispatched from the Atlanta field office. They will be there in under 3 hours. I suggest you find a very good lawyer." And Sheriff Sir Brody squeaked, "Pray." The line went dead. Sheriff John Brody slowly placed the receiver back in its cradle. The click echoed in the dead, silent room. He looked at Miller, not with anger, but with the hollow-eyed terror of a man who has just seen his own ruin. "What?" Brody said, his voice a strangled rasp. "Did you two idiots do?" Miller's face was a mess of confusion and fear. "Sheriff, he was just some punk kid. That punk kid's," Father Brody seethed, "is the man who can send the entire damn FBI to kick our doors in before sunrise. He can seize every file, every computer, every asset we have. He is the federal government." He pointed a trembling finger at Jamal, who was watching this meltdown with a grim sense of vindication. "Get him out of here. Get him to the hospital." "Now and somebody find that damn gum." Miller put on the interrogation room camera. The storm hadn't just been called down. It had already made landfall. The 2 hours that followed the phone call were a masterclass in panic. The swaggering authority of the Oak Creek Police Department evaporated, replaced by the frantic energy of rats on a sinking ship. Sheriff Brody barked orders, his voice cracking with desperation. Miller and Davies scrambled, their faces pale with the sweat of men who suddenly understood the concept of consequences. Jamal was treated like a piece of priceless, fragile art. Two deputies, their faces grim and their hands gentle, escorted him not to a patrol car, but to Brody's own plush air-conditioned SUV. They drove him to the Oak Creek County General Hospital, a small, sleepy facility that suddenly buzzed with an unprecedented level of urgency. The chief of staff himself met them at the emergency room door. X-rays confirmed 2 fractured ribs and a hairline fracture in his right wrist, likely from when he tried to break his fall in the interrogation room. A doctor meticulously documented every bruise, every cut, every abrasion, the clinical language a stark testament to the violence he had endured. They offered him painkillers, but he refused, wanting to keep his head clear. As he sat on the examination table, the orange jumpsuit now replaced with a hospital gown. He saw Sheriff Brody pacing in the hallway, his phone pressed to his ear, his expression growing more desperate with each call he made. He was calling in favors trying to build a dam against the tidal wave he knew was coming. Meanwhile, 150 miles away in Atlanta and 600 miles away in Washington, D.C., the gears of a machine far more powerful than Brody could comprehend were turning with terrifying speed and efficiency. In the D.C. command center of the Department of Justice, Robert Vance stood before a bank of monitors. The father in him was a screaming, raw nerve of fury and fear for his son. But the Attorney General was in control. His face was a mask of cold, implacable purpose. "Get me Elena Ramirez," he commanded to an aide. Elena Ramirez was the head of the Civil Rights Division's criminal section, a bulldog of a prosecutor with a reputation for dismantling corrupt police departments. She was sharp, relentless, and had a particular distaste for cops who betrayed their oath. Within minutes, she was on a secure video line from the FBI's Atlanta field office. "Ms. Ramirez," Vance began, his voice devoid of emotion, "I am recusing myself from direct oversight of this case for personal reasons, but I am authorizing a full-scale federal investigation into the Oak Creek Police Department in Oak Creek, Georgia, effective immediately. I want a preliminary injunction filed against the department by morning. I want a team on the ground before sundown. Your targets are Sheriff John Brody, Officer Daniel Miller, and Officer Chris Davis. The initial charges will be deprivation of rights under color of law. Warrants are being drawn up as we speak to seize all evidence." "Understood, Mr. Attorney General." Ramirez said, her eyes already alight with the fire of the hunt. "What's the probable cause?" "My son, Vance," said the 2 words landing with the force of a hammer blow. Ramirez's professional demeanor didn't slip, but a flicker of understanding crossed her face. "I'm on it, sir. We'll turn that town inside out." The federal tide began to roll. It wasn't a wave, it was a tsunami. Back in Oak Creek, Jamal was discharged from the hospital, his ribs taped and his wrist in a brace. He was handed back his clothes, his wallet, his phone. No apology, no explanation, just the silent, fearful stares of the deputies. Sheriff Brody was waiting for him, his father's Lexus parked out front. It had been brought from the impound lot, the scattered contents of his interview folder, now neatly stacked on the passenger seat. "Your car keys," Brody said, holding them out. His hand was still trembling. "You're free to go. There's been a terrible mistake." Jamal took the keys, his eyes locking with the sheriff's. He saw no remorse in the man's eyes, only fear. Fear of being caught. "The mistake," Jamal said, his voice low and steady, "was yours." He got in his car and drove away, not towards Atlanta, but to a nearby hotel his father had already booked for him. As he pulled out of the hospital parking lot, he saw the first signs of the storm. A procession of black Suburbans and sedans with government plates was turning off the main highway, heading directly for the center of Oak Creek. The Federals had arrived. The scene at the Oak Creek Police Department was one of controlled chaos. FBI agents clad in dark blue windbreakers streamed into the building. They weren't asking, they were telling. They presented Sheriff Brody with a warrant that was 5 pages long, authorizing the seizure of everything case files, computers, servers, personnel records, weapons, and all audio-visual recordings. Elena Ramirez, a sharp woman in a no-nonsense pantsuit, led the charge. She walked into Brody's office as if she owned it. "Sheriff Brody," she said, not offering a handshake. "I'm Assistant U.S. Attorney Elena Ramirez. This is my investigation now. You and your officers will be interviewed. You have the right to an attorney. I strongly suggest you exercise that right." Brody, who had been trying to shred documents in his office, froze. His half-hearted attempt at a cover-up had failed before it even began. The feds were ruthlessly efficient. They immediately secured the evidence room and the server room. An agent found the wad of gum stuck to the interrogation room camera and carefully placed it in an evidence bag. Another agent reviewing the station's security footage found the exact moment the camera's feed had gone dark and noted the time. It corresponded perfectly with the period Jamal was unaccounted for. In the locker room, an agent opened Officer Miller's personal locker. Tucked away in a gym bag beneath a pile of dirty clothes, they found a Reynolds Wrap package containing a dozen more small baggies, each filled with the same white crystalline substance. They were drop bags. A drug dealer's toolkit repurposed for a corrupt cop. The biggest bombshell came from the body cam footage. Officer Davies, the younger nervous cop, had forgotten to turn his camera off immediately after cuffing Jamal. The camera pointing down at the ground had remained on for another 3 minutes. The audio, however, was crystal clear. Miller muffled, "Did you get it in there?" Good, Davies muffled, "Yeah, between the seat and the console. Same as always." Miller muffled, "Good. This rich boy thinks he can just cruise through our town. Time he learned a lesson." It was the smoking gun, a direct, unequivocal confession of evidence tampering caught on their own device. When Elena Ramirez heard the audio, she smiled a grim, tight-lipped smile. This wasn't just about a wrongful arrest and an assault anymore. This was a conspiracy. This was a pattern of corruption, and she was going to burn it to the ground. The federal investigation was like a high-pressure hose directed at the rotten foundation of the Oak Creek Police Department. Within 24 hours, the public story had exploded. "Attorney General's son beaten, framed by Georgia cops," screamed the headlines. News vans with satellite dishes sprouted like mushrooms in the Oak Creek town square, their cameras pointed squarely at the besieged police station. For Sheriff Brody and Officer Miller, the instinct was to circle the wagons. They hired a local bulldog lawyer, who immediately went on the offensive, claiming the investigation was a politically motivated witch hunt by a vengeful DC elite. Miller claimed Jamal had been belligerent and resisted arrest, and that the drugs were legitimately found. Brody backed him up, painting a picture of his officers as hard-working local heroes being targeted by federal overreach. But their narrative was a house of cards, and Elena Ramirez held a flamethrower. She focused her immense pressure on the weakest link, Officer Chris Davies. While Brody and Miller were career bullies, hardened and arrogant, Davies was different. He was young only 3 years on the force. He had a new mortgage and a young family. And unlike the others, he still had the ghost of a conscience. Ramirez didn't bring Davies into a cold interrogation room. She had him brought to the temporary federal command center they had set up in the Oak Creek courthouse. She sat with him in a conference room with a large window overlooking the town square, a pot of fresh coffee between them. "Chris," she began, her tone disarmingly gentle, "I've read your file. You were top of your class at the academy. Commendations for community service in your first year. You didn't get into this line of work to be Daniel Miller's heavy. Davies stared into his coffee cup, his hands trembling slightly. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? Ramirez slid a folder across the table. It was a transcript. This is from your body cam audio, the part you forgot to turn off. Did you get it in there good? Miller asks. Yeah, between the seat and the console. Same as always. You reply. She tapped the page. Tell me about same as always. Chris. Davies's face went ashen. He had thought the camera was off. He had thought it was just his word against theirs. Look at me. Chris Ramirez said, her voice firm, but not unkind. Right now you're looking at conspiracy to deprive a citizen of their civil rights, planting evidence perjury, and obstruction of justice. That's a 10-year federal sentence minimum. You'll be in your 40s when you get out. Your kids will be grown. You'll lose your pension, your house, everything. She let the words hang in the air. Or she continued, leaning forward. You can be a witness. You can tell us the truth. Not just about Jamal Vance, but about everything. About same as always. She laid out the offer, a proffer agreement. Davies would tell them everything he knew. If his information was truthful and useful, they would offer him a plea deal. He would still face charges, but instead of a decade in a federal penitentiary, he might get a year or two in a minimum security facility. He would have a future. Miller and Brody, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. They're not going to protect you, Chris. When the time comes, they will throw you under the bus to save themselves. They will say you were a rogue rookie, that you planted the drugs on your own. Who do you think a jury will believe, a decorated sheriff and a 20-year veteran, or the new guy on the force? Every word was a perfectly aimed arrow piercing Davies's fragile defenses. He could see his life unspooling before his eyes. The choice was clear: sink with the ship or grab the only lifeboat being offered. I need to talk to a lawyer, he stammered. Good, Ramirez said with a nod. That's the smartest thing you've said all day. The cracks in the blue wall of silence were beginning to show. But the corruption in Oak Creek ran deeper than just 3 cops. As Ramirez's team dug into the department's finances and case files, they discovered a disturbing pattern. For years, Brody had been running a sophisticated shakedown operation. They would target out-of-town drivers with nice cars, particularly people of color, on Route 78. They would use planted drugs as leverage to seize cash under civil asset forfeiture laws. Most of the cash was never officially logged. It was a slush fund that enriched Brody Miller and a select few others. This was their same as always. Jamal Vance wasn't the first. He was just the first one who had the power to fight back on a global scale. The investigation hit a new, more dangerous level when a forensic accountant flagged a series of payments from Sheriff Brody's slush fund to a P.O. box linked to a powerful Georgia state senator named Richard Egan. Egan was the head of the state's Judiciary Committee. He was the man who had stonewalled previous attempts at police reform and had personally recommended Brody for state and federal grants. Brody wasn't just a corrupt small-town sheriff. He was a protected asset of a corrupt state politician. This was no longer just about police brutality. It was about systemic political corruption. Senator Egan, feeling the heat, began to make calls. He called the governor. He called his contacts in Washington, trying to pressure the DOJ to back off, framing it as a jurisdictional dispute. One evening, Robert Vance received a call on his personal cell phone. It was Senator Egan. Bob Egan began, his voice oozing a false, folksy charm. I think this situation down in Oak Creek has gotten a little out of hand. It's a local matter. I think we can resolve this without the full might of the federal government embarrassing a good, God-fearing community. Robert Vance stood in his quiet study, looking at a photo of Jamal on his desk. His voice was dangerously calm. "Senator," he said, "the men you're protecting broke my son's ribs. They tried to ruin his life. This isn't a local matter anymore. It's my matter. And I suggest you stay the hell out of it. Because if my investigators find so much as a single thread connecting you to Sheriff Brody's criminal enterprise, I will not hesitate to unravel your entire career. Are we clear?" Egan was silent for a moment, the bravado gone. "Crystal," he said, and hung up. The battle lines were drawn. This was bigger than Oak Creek now. It was a war against a rot that went straight to the heart of the state's power structure. And Elena Ramirez, armed with a terrified rookie cop ready to talk, was about to launch the main offensive. After consulting with a public defender, Officer Chris Davies made his choice. He chose survival. He sat across from Elena Ramirez and her team, and for 6 straight hours the truth about Oak Creek poured out of him. He detailed the asset forfeiture scheme, the planted evidence, the racist jokes Miller and Brody told when they thought no one was listening. He described a dozen other cases, just like Jamal's, where innocent people were strong-armed into giving up cash to avoid trumped-up charges. He confessed that Sheriff Brody had ordered him and Miller to lose the body cam footage from Jamal's arrest, but Davies had been too panicked to remember his own camera was still recording. His testimony was damning, but Ramirez wanted more. She wanted Brody and Miller caught in their own words, with no wiggle room, no chance to claim their underling was lying to save his own skin. "Chris," she said, her expression serious, "we need you to do one more thing for us. We need you to wear a wire." The color drained from Davies's face. "They'll kill me," he whispered. "They won't know an FBI agent assured him. It's a button cam, state-of-the-art. They'll never see it. We just need you to talk to them. Get them to talk about the Vance kid. Get them to talk about the money." For 2 days, Davies was a nervous wreck, but the thought of 10 years in prison was a powerful motivator. The FBI tech team wired him up, replacing a button on his uniform shirt with a tiny high-fidelity camera and microphone. The plan was simple. Davies would approach Miller in the station's break room, pretending to be terrified about the federal investigation and worried about their stories matching up. Davies walked into the break room, his heart pounding so hard he was sure Miller could hear it. Miller was pouring himself a cup of sludgy coffee, his face a mask of defiant anger. Danny Davies began his voice, trembling slightly, just as the FBI had coached him. "Danny, I'm scared, man. These feds, they're not backing down. They're talking about conspiracy charges." Miller scoffed. "Let 'em talk. They got nothing. It's our word against some dope-dealing punk. Brody's got Senator Egan making calls. This'll all blow over." "But what about the drugs?" Davies pressed his voice, a panicked whisper. "What if they search my patrol car? I still have some of the, the stuff Brody gives us." "What if they find it?" Miller finally turned, his eyes narrowing. He grabbed Davies by the arm and pulled him into a corner, away from the door. Right into the button cam's perfect field of view. "You idiot," Miller hissed. "I told you to get rid of that. Just dump it. As for the kid, we stick to the story. He was swerving, we pulled him over, he got lippy, and the drugs were in the car. He probably hit his ribs falling down when he resisted. It's a perfect story. But I planted it," Danny Davies whimpered. "Just like you told me to. Just like we always do." "What if they prove it?" Miller's face darkened. "Nobody proves nothing. Brody will take care of it. That's what the money we kick up to Egan is for protection. So stop your damn whining. We're all in this together. Now man up." In a surveillance van parked a block away, Elena Ramirez listened, a triumphant smile spreading across her face. "We've got him," she said to the agents around her. "We've got it all. conspiracy, evidence tampering, the shakedown scheme, and the direct link to Senator Egan. It was the whole rotten enterprise tied up in a neat little bow. The takedown was swift and overwhelming. The next morning, as Sheriff Brody and Officer Miller arrived for work, they were met not by their deputies, but by a phalanx of FBI agents in full tactical gear. "John Brody, you are under arrest for conspiracy extortion and deprivation of rights under color of law," an agent announced, cuffing the stunned sheriff. Daniel Miller Ramirez said, personally, stepping up to the other officer, "You are under arrest for the same, and we'll be adding assault and evidence tampering to your list." Miller's face went from disbelief to pure rage. "You can't do this," he bellowed as he was forced to his knees. "We just did," Ramirez said coldly. The arrests were the lead story on every news channel in the country. The sight of a decorated sheriff and his veteran officer being led away in handcuffs by the FBI sent a shockwave through the law enforcement community. The blue wall of silence in Oak Creek crumbled completely. Other officers, seeing their leaders fall, rushed to cooperate, hoping to save their own careers. In Washington, Robert Vance held a press conference. He stood at the podium, his face grim and resolute. He laid out the charges against the Oak Creek officers, describing the system of corruption they had created. He spoke not as a father, but as the Attorney General, vowing to root out such corruption wherever it was found. But at the end, a reporter asked Mr. Attorney General, "How is your son doing?" For the first time, the mask of the prosecutor slipped. The father emerged, his voice softened. "My son is strong, he is resilient, and he is the bravest person I know. He endured an ordeal that no citizen, and certainly no child, should ever have to face. And through his courage, a deep-seated injustice has been brought to light. I am immensely proud of him." Jamal watched the press conference from his hotel room. The Harrison Scholarship Committee from Emory had already called, not only rescheduling his interview, but expressing their horror at what had happened. They assured him his place was secure. But something inside him had shifted. The path he had seen for himself, a career in economics or business, now seemed hollow. The world was not a spreadsheet. It was a place of brutal, unfair realities. And he had just stared into the face of one of them. He knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that his life had a new purpose. The wheels of federal justice grind slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. The trials of John Brody and Daniel Miller were a public spectacle. The evidence presented by Assistant U.S. Attorney Elena Ramirez was overwhelming. The body cam audio, the discovery of the drop bags, and most damningly, the crystal-clear recording from Davies's button cam left no room for doubt. Chris Davies, the disgraced rookie, was the prosecution's star witness. On the stand, he tearfully recounted the years of corruption, painting a vivid picture of a department rotten from the top down. He looked directly at Jamal, who sat in the front row with his father, and apologized. "I was a coward," Davies said, his voice thick with shame. "I'm sorry." The defense attorneys tried to paint Jamal as a troubled youth and Davies as a disgruntled liar, but the jury saw through it. After just 4 hours of deliberation, the verdict came back guilty. On all counts, the sentencing was brutal. Daniel Miller, for his direct role in the assault and his long history of abuse, was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Sheriff John Brody, for being the architect of the conspiracy and for violating the public trust, received a sentence of 30 years. As they were led away in chains, their faces were slack with the shock of men who never believed they would face a reckoning. For his full cooperation, Chris Davies received a much-reduced sentence of 18 months in a minimum security facility. He would lose his career and his freedom for a time, but he would one day have a chance to rebuild his life. The karma didn't stop there. The thread that connected Brody to Senator Richard Egan unraveled his career. Faced with a federal indictment for accepting bribes and obstruction of justice, Egan resigned from the state Senate in disgrace. He took a plea deal to avoid a lengthy trial, ending his political career forever. The Oak Creek Police Department was gutted. It was placed under a federal consent decree, a multi-year period of supervision by the Department of Justice to ensure complete and total reform of its policies, training, and culture. The sundown town was finally seeing the light. A year later, Jamal Vance walked onto the campus of Emory University, not as an economics major, but as a pre-law student. His experience had forged a new path for him. The bruises had faded, and his ribs had healed, but the memory of the injustice had become a fire inside him. He was no longer the naive boy who believed the world was fair. He knew it wasn't, but he also knew that it was worth fighting for. His father, Robert Vance, stepped down as Attorney General at the end of the presidential term. He joined the faculty at Howard University School of Law, wanting to help shape the next generation of civil rights attorneys. He had seen the system at its most powerful and its most corrupt. He'd seen his own son nearly consumed by it. Now he wanted to equip others for the fight. The story of Jamal Vance became a case study, a cautionary tale taught in law schools and police academies across the country. It was a story about the terrifying abuse of power, but it was also a story of resilience. It showed how a system, no matter how corrupt, could be held accountable. It was a stark reminder that justice is not always guaranteed, but must sometimes be demanded with a single courageous call that brings a storm, and that sometimes, for those who prey on the powerless karma, doesn't just knock on the door, it kicks it off the hinges with a federal warrant. The story of Jamal Vance is a powerful and sobering reminder that injustice can hide in plain sight even on a sunny afternoon in a picture-perfect town. It reveals how quickly a life can be upended by prejudice and corruption. But more importantly, it shows the incredible power of courage and the unshakable bond between a father and a son. They thought Jamal was just another victim, but he refused to be a statistic. His one phone call wasn't just a plea for help, it was an act of defiance that triggered a hurricane of justice, cleansing a corrupt system from the top down. If this story of resilience, justice, and the hard hand of karma moved you, please take a moment to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, to spread awareness that no one is above the law. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. We are dedicated to bringing you more compelling, true-to-life stories that matter. Your support helps us continue to shine a light in the darkest of corners. Thank you for listening.